Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the Computer Chess Championship Season 15. So before this real Season 15 starts, we have many of these exhibition tournaments, we have many of these exhibition matches, and now this Blitz madness is still going on, in which Stockfish is of course in the lead. This Stockfish Nge, this Stockfish 12 version is really incredible. It crushes every other engine with a great performance. Stockfish Nge hasn't lost a game through the whole tournament so far. Over 500 games have been played, so it's really incredible performance. So it's basically unbeatable. And if you have noticed, I use sometimes when I analyze this engine chess games, then I use some cool pictures. Maybe, for instance, if Stockfish plays against Scorpio, then we have this big neon Scorpio which really pumps out, and it seems that it could really fight against Stockfish because it's a Scorpion, of course, and it's a dangerous animal. But you see now in this game, we have now this cyborg, or maybe this really great humanic robot here that's playing a red snowflake in winter. Really, this engine winter has this logo, a red snowflake, and it's simple as that. So it's a really big robot against a small snowflake. So it's really a game like this that I wanted to show you today. Great performance again by the stock, and be prepared. This is again some wild shit going on here. So let's check out now the game. We have now, of course, again round one and fight. So c4 played by Stockfish, e5 by the small snowflake winter here, g3. So knight to c6, knight to c3, and now g6. So bishop to g2. This was so far an English opening, symmetrical setup, which transposed now basically into a King's Indian setup by Black. Black wants to make maybe something like d6 f5, and then make also something happen here on the king side. So here d6 played immediately by Winter. We have e3. The idea behind this move is to have a better flexibility in the game, and then if we manage to maybe get our d5 pawn breakthrough, then we could have maybe two advanced centralized pawns, which could create, of course, a very nice space advantage. But sometimes it can be tricky to play the d4 immediately. I've lost also many games when I managed to push the pawn on d4, because then in some occasions you could have maybe the hanging pawns, and if you don't protect them very well, they could be an object of your opponent's attack. So I had my winning games in these types of setups, but I had also some great losing games, I have to say it like this, because it's really a wild game after a potential d4 pawn breakthrough. And now after bishop to g7 we have knight to e2, which is of course a further preparation of the d4 move. So knight to e7, we have now d3. Here Stockfish stops a little bit the progress in the center immediately. We have a5 now, which was a novelty, but I'm not sure if that's such a great move. Basically we haven't been challenged immediately here by white. If, for instance, rook to b1 happens, then we could play something like a5 in order maybe to stop a little bit white's progress on the queen side, because most of the times you see this pawn structure, which is similar to the great white snake. It's this so-called great white snake pawn structure set up here by white. White will coordinate the attack most of the times on the queen side, so it means white will make progress maybe with b4, b5, and similar ideas. So I don't think that you should play really immediately f5, which is, as I said, a novelty, but it's not maybe the best of ideas, because you haven't been challenged with rook to b1 and b4 immediately. So here b3, we have bishop to e6, and now d4. So now Stockfish doesn't want to wait. Now it's time to make a pawn breakthrough, because the bishop on e6 is a little bit exposed here. There are now, of course, the d5 pawn breakthrough motifs with the fork on the knight and the bishop on e6. We have e takes d4, and now bishop to g4. And from this point on, this game will be really one of the wildest. So here h3 played by Stockfish, and now Winter finds a great tactic. Knight takes d4. So the bishop is hanging, but here Winter calculated a great tactic. H takes g4, knight to e2, and now king to e2. And you see now this is really weird game, because after bishop to c3, the king is in the center, and of course white has the bishop pair. But that's now what really surprised me. The next move by Stockfish. Stockfish played the move bishop to d2 and sacrificed simply the rook for the exchange. Really incredible. So bishop takes a1. We have queen to a1, Now the rook is hanging, and the problem is now that there are no good developing moves here for black suddenly. You see, it's really a weird position. The king is on e2. It's really endangered. And now king to d7 was played by Winter. So if you try something like rook to g8, maybe to escape here with the rook from this diagonal, but also to stay here maybe with the king a little bit further in the center with preparations, maybe queen to d7 and queenside castling, then you see your b7 pawn is hanging. Now the bishop pair is really, really dangerous. Also here, the h7 pawn is hanging. So if you try something like queen to d7 instead of this rook move, you see you simply lose the rook. So that's why you have to play the move king to d7. And now black will have really, really troubles to find a way with these rooks into the game, because this rook on h8 is a little bit stuck to the defense of the h7 pawn. This rook is endangered, of course, here on this diagonal. So this is really a great cross activity here by the queen, by the bishops. They are aiming all over the board. So far, the exchange that Winter got here in the game doesn't bring it anything, because it didn't find so far good ways to get this rook into the game. So king to f1, which was really a surprise for me. But if you take this pawn immediately, then it's not such a good idea. The king to f1, it's really the best move. Here you could get maybe the move a4, and that's the most important thing. And now after maybe b4, we could still hang on onto this position on the queen side, and maybe after rook to b8, we would simply escape with the bishop. But still, this is a more open game. In the game king to f1, so here Stockfish didn't take the pawn. Stockfish tried to stay with the bishops on the board where there are. Still, this king is endangered here on d7. Still, our bishops can find a way into the game. So knight to c6, we have g5. This is a really great paralyzing move. This move is holding basically the 3 pawns here of blacks. The whole king side, this g5 pawn is holding here, because you cannot move f5, you cannot move h5, you cannot improve really the position of 2 of these backwards pawns. And now it's really to exploit really the star square weaknesses here that black has in the position. We have king to c8, and now bishop to c3. Now the rook has to move. Rook to f8 was played, and the problem is, you see now that black can never get the rook connection. The rook connection is a very important segment of the chess game. How to connect them? You see, you need many moves. King to b8, maybe king to a7, queen to d7. So there are really 3 moves, at least 3 moves to make something happen. And so far, I think Stockfish will find a way to activate the pieces. We have still opportunity to play bishop to h3. So you're not going to bring your queen to d7. If you try something like maybe queen to e7, you see bishop to f6 will happen. So the queen is also a little bit stuck here on the starting square on d8. Really, really great attacking formation now of this bishop pair. We have bishop to g7, rook to g8, and now bishop to f6. You see, you cannot move the queen to d7, then bishop to h3. That's really a serious threat here. So queen to e8, we have queen to b2, and now king to b8, rook takes h7. Finally, we have grabbed this very important pawn. But the problem is again that this pawn is also a weakness. So this knight will come, this bishop will come into the game. If you try maybe to cement the knight on e5 to maybe have a protection of your f7 pawn, still this knight can be always kicked away with the potential f4. So you shouldn't be worried about the potential knight outpost on e5, because if black could have proceeded like this, if this black's knight couldn't be kicked away by a pawn in the center, if this knight stays in the center, then black has, I think, good opportunities. But with this f4 move, this knight still can be kicked away. So here, rook to a6, really a desperate try. We'll give that that was pathetic. That was this Raiden voice from Mortal Kombat. So that was really pathetic. Rook to a6, really a desperate try to find a way with your rook into the game. But there are really no good squares for the rook here in the game. Of course, bishop to d5 was played. You see now how the bishops are aiming here all over the board. Now we can even take immediately this pawn on f7 in the game, rook to f8. But now Stockfish plays a great move. Queen to e2, first deflecting the queen from the defense of this f7. And if we manage to grab this pawn on f7, we can have then maybe a 3 versus 1 situation on the king side, with the bishop pair aiming on the king side. So it's really tricky in endgame if this goes in endgame. If we manage to grab the pawn on f7, we have queen to d7, and now bishop to g7, again attacking the rook, rook to d8, and now bishop to c3. So rook to e8. So queen to f3, again, you see you cannot protect anymore this pawn on an f7. We have queen to d8, and now queen to f6. Again, a great move by Stockfish, again trying to trade off the queens, simplifying the position. We have rook to f8, and now rook takes f7. Finally, we have taken the pawn, and now it's a completely winning endgame here. Although still you have to play more accurate and active moves, but this 3 versus 1 situation is simply, I think, too much to handle. And the problem is now for black that black didn't make any counterplay on the queen side. Even if you try now the move a4, still we can pass through with the move b4. So now we could even try b5, and I still think that black has a good attack here on the queen side. So it's simply too slow. So here, after move rook to f7, we have rook takes f7, bishop to f7, knight to e7, and now bishop to e6. Very important move to really cut off all of the files, all of the diagonals all over the board. You see how these bishops are really extremely dangerous here in the game. Queen to e8, again, not the best of moves, but you don't really have better moves. It's really incredible how Stockfish paralyzed here all of the pieces of blacks. We have queen to h8, again a simplification move. We really want to go into a simplified line, going into this 3 versus 1 situation. Queen to h8, bishop to h8, rook to a8. Finally, this rook comes into the game. This was really a bad rook here. Rook to a8, then rook to a6, and then rook to a8 again. Really, this rook has a rough time. So bishop to f6, attacking the knight, king to a7, and now f4. You see how dangerous now this position is. Knight to g8, we have bishop to c3. This knight is also paralyzed. This knight doesn't have any good squares. We have rook to f8, and now bishop to a5. Very nice move, taking another pawn. King to b8, and now bishop to c3. Knight to e7, and what, of course, black would love to do is cement the knight on f5. But again, you cannot play on a static position. You cannot fix the position with the potential knight to f5 move. We have simply g4, and still this knight can be kicked away. So bishop to g7, rook to e8. We have bishop to f7. We have rook to d8, and now this king comes further into the attack. Very important move. This is now an endgame, and in endgames you should really play with your king. Very important move now. King to f2, c6. Now g4. We have king to c7, and now bishop to e6 again. Rook to a8. But now very important move also, a4. We're not allowing this rook to come into the game. If this rook maybe go somewhere, rook to a1, maybe it could go behind, but still this is a completely winning endgame here for white. So b6, bishop to f6, we have d5, bishop takes e7. What the threat is, of course, I'm getting challenged here again. I cannot play now, sorry. After the move bishop to e7, of course, here Winter tried rook to e8, grabbing at least one of the pawns, but it's not a problem as we have bishop to f7, and now bishop takes g6. We have now 3 connected pass pawns, and this is simply game over. So king to d6 was played, bishop to d3. We have bishop d takes c4, bishop to c4, and now rook to g7. We have king to f3, b5, a takes b, c takes b, and really bishop to b5 here. After the move king to e7, bishop to c4, we have 4 pawns on the board. Here's Winter tried to take, but now these 2 connected pass pawns, as I said, are simply too much to handle here. We have f6, rook to g3, again some checks, but now this pawn can move. Again, some checks here by Winter, and here Winter sacrificed the pawn, and it was sacrificed the rook, pardon me, and it was game over. So great attack, but really let's go back to this opening line. Really incredible stuff what happening in the early stage of the game. Here d4, and now after move knight to d4, h takes g4, knight to e2, king takes e2, bishop takes c3, and now bishop to d2, sacrificing the rook for the exchange to get a really nasty bishop pair all over the board. Really great attack again by the stock, and as I said, these are really the best chess game for me that we can follow, and I hope you don't mind that I analyze so many of them, because this is really simply great chess. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. As I said, if you want to see more brutal games like this, check out my commented chess games played by computers. And if you want to know more about chess, about the common principles, you can check out my Basics in Chess series, in which I show you opening principles, middle game strategies, and the endgame strategies. And you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.